Clara Bennett did not cry when her father sold her. She had already used up every tear the night before alone in the dark, listening through the wall, while men with cold voices decided what her life was worth. She stood straight, chin up, hands still. But when the door opened, and she saw him, the one man she never expected standing there, with money already counted out in his hand, something inside her chest split clean in two. He had loved her for 7 years, and she had never known. If this story already has your heart, hit subscribe, and come along for every twist and turn, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning they sold Clara Bennett started like every other morning in Ridgeline, Montana. Hot, dry. The kind of summer that made the mountains look painted against the sky and made everything at ground level feel like it was slowly burning down. Clara was already awake before the rooster called. She had been awake most of the night, sitting on the edge of the narrow bed in the room she had slept in since she was 6 years old, listening to the voices downstairs grow louder, and then quieter, and then loud again. She knew what those voices meant. She had known for 3 days. Her father, Roy Bennett, had borrowed money he could not repay from a man named Harlan Doss, the kind of man who wore clean boots in a dirty town and smiled with only half his face. Doss owned the grain supply, the mill contracts, and 3 of the 5 elected positions in Ridgeline's local council. He did not need to threaten people loudly. He just waited. Let the weight of what he was owed press down until the person under it couldn't breathe. Roy Bennett had stopped breathing a long time ago. He was not a bad man exactly. He was a weak one, which sometimes caused more damage. He had borrowed the first loan to keep the farm after Clara's mother died. He had borrowed the second to fix the barn roof. He had borrowed the third, and Clara never fully understood why just 6 months ago, when there was no particular crisis, no emergency, just a quiet desperation that had no name. Doss had come to collect, and Roy, sitting at his kitchen table with his hands shaking and his eyes red, had offered the only thing he had left: his daughter. Clara had heard that part through the wall. She had pressed her back against the plaster and listened to her father say her name like it was a transaction, like it was a number, like the 27 years she had lived in this house, cooked in this kitchen, worked this land beside him, like all of it could be exchanged for a cleared ledger and a handshake. She did not cry that night. She made herself stop after the first few minutes because she understood with a cold clarity that frightened her that crying would not help her now. What she needed was to think. By morning, she had stopped thinking and started simply enduring. Because some things could not be thought through. Some things just had to be walked through one step at a time, even when the ground beneath you had already given way. Harlan Doss arrived at 8 o'clock with 2 men at his back. He came into the house without knocking, the way men who owned things tended to do. Not with arrogance exactly, but with a complete absence of any consideration that the space might belong to someone else. Roy Bennett stood up from the table when Doss entered. He did not meet his daughter's eyes. Clara stood near the fireplace. She had dressed carefully that morning in the cleanest dress she owned, the dark blue one with the small buttons at the collar. She did not know why she had done that. Perhaps because she wanted whatever happened next to happen to a woman who looked like she had some dignity left. "Miss Bennett," Doss said, nodding at her with that half-smile. She did not respond. "Your father and I have come to a final arrangement," Doss continued. He was not unkind in his tone, which was somehow worse than cruelty would have been. "You'll be coming with me today. I have a household that needs managing. The debt will be considered settled once you've worked it off. Could be a year, could be 2. Could be never," Clara said. Doss tilted his head. "I beg your pardon? If you keep adjusting the numbers the way you adjusted my father's loan, it could be never." She kept her voice level. She was proud of that. "I've seen how you do your accounting, Mr. Doss. I've talked to the Harmon family and the Wicker family and the Prestons. None of them ever worked their way clear of you. That's not an accident." A silence moved through the room. One of Doss's men shifted his weight. Roy Bennett finally looked at his daughter, and what Clara saw in his face was not guilt, or not only guilt. It was fear. He was afraid of what she might say next, not afraid for her, afraid for himself. That was the moment something permanently changed between them. "You'll come willingly," Doss said, and his voice had cooled by several degrees. "Or your father forfeits the farm entirely, and we escort you out regardless. Those are the options, Miss Bennett. I'd encourage you to consider them carefully." Clara looked at her father. Roy looked at the table. She reached for the small bag she had packed the night before because she had known even while telling herself she didn't know that it would come to this, and she picked it up. "Then let's get this over with," she said. They had barely stepped onto the front porch when the sound of a horse reached them. One horse, moving fast but not frantically. The kind of pace that said the rider was in a hurry, but not in a panic. Controlled. Deliberate. Clara shielded her eyes against the summer glare and watched the rider come down the ridge road, and something in the shape of him, the width of his shoulders, the way he sat a horse. Like he had been born doing it, made her breath catch before she even knew who it was. He pulled up at the fence line, dismounted in one clean movement. And when he pushed his hat back and looked at the group on the porch, Clara felt the ground tilt slightly beneath her feet. Ethan Walker. She had not seen him in close to 2 years. He came to town maybe 3 or 4 times a year for supplies, and he never stayed long. Never talked much. Never gave people a reason to remember him, which meant, paradoxically, that people always did. There was something about a man who kept to himself that made other people watch him more carefully. Clara had watched him. She had never admitted that to anyone, including herself, except in those quiet hours of honesty that only came at 3 in the morning. He was 36 years old, broad through the chest and shoulders from years of physical work at altitude. Dark hair worn a little long, a jaw that looked like it had been made by someone who took their time. He had gray eyes that looked almost silver in certain light, and they were currently fixed on Harlan Doss with an expression that Clara could only describe as quiet and extremely dangerous. "Walker," Doss said. His tone shifted, not quite nervous, but recalibrating. "This is a private matter." "I heard," Ethan said. "Then you know it doesn't concern you." Ethan looked past Doss, past the 2 men, past Roy Bennett, and found Clara's face. He looked at her for just a moment, 2 seconds, maybe 3, and in that look was something she couldn't fully read, something that had weight to it. History. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document and an envelope. He held both out toward Doss. "I'm buying the debt," he said. "Whatever Bennett owes you, I'm paying it now. Full amount, in cash." Complete silence. Even the summer heat seemed to pause. Doss stared at the envelope. "The arrangement's already been made." "The arrangement," Ethan said calmly, "was made under duress, and if you want to argue that point in front of Judge Calloway over in Billings, I'm happy to ride there with you this afternoon and let him decide whether what you've been doing to families in this county qualifies as legal contract or something considerably less comfortable." Another silence. This one longer. Doss was a man who understood leverage. He recognized when someone else had found his, and he recognized when the calculation had shifted. He took the envelope. He did not count the money in front of them, but Clara saw his thumb work the edge of the bills inside, felt the assessment happening. "The debt is cleared," he said finally, his voice careful and controlled. "We're done here." He turned and walked back down the path without looking at Roy Bennett. His men followed. They did not rush. Men like Doss never rushed, but they left. Clara stood on the porch still holding her bag and looked at Ethan Walker. "Why?" she said. It was the only word she had. He put his hat back on, adjusted the brim. "Because it needed doing," he said, "and because no one else was going to do it." Roy Bennett had gone back inside by then. He had simply turned and walked through the door as if the whole thing had been a minor inconvenience resolved, and Clara did not follow him. She stood in the yard with the July heat pressing down on her shoulders and tried to understand what had just happened. Ethan had tied his horse to the fence post and was standing a few feet away, giving her space, which she noticed and appreciated more than she could have explained. "I don't have a way to repay you," she said. "I'm not asking you to." "Mr. Walker." "Ethan." She stopped, looked at him. "We've spoken maybe 4 times in our lives." "5," he said. "But I don't expect you to remember all of them." She didn't know what to do with that. "I can't accept charity." "It's not charity." He was quiet for a moment. "I have a ranch, up on the North Ridge about 6 miles from town. I've been running it alone for going on 4 years now, and there's more work than one man can manage well. I need someone who can keep house, keep accounts, keep the kitchen running when I'm out working stock." He met her eyes directly. "I'm offering you a job, Miss Bennett. Fair wage, your own room, your own key. You work as long as you choose to stay, and you leave whenever you decide to go. No obligation beyond the work itself." Clara studied him. "Why me?" she asked. "You could hire any woman in town. Half of them would jump at the chance." Something moved across his face. Barely there gone before she could name it. "I don't want any woman in town," he said. "I want someone who knows how to work. Someone who doesn't need to be managed or entertained or convinced of her own worth every other day." He paused. "I've watched you run your father's farm for the last 6 years, Miss Bennett, after your mother passed. I've seen how you handled the dry season in '81 and the fence collapse in '83 and the 3 hands who quit on the same day in '84. You didn't fall apart, you just fixed it." Clara felt something uncomfortable move through her chest. Being seen, actually seen, not the surface version of being seen, but the underneath kind, was not something she was accustomed to. "You've been watching me," she said. "Paying attention," he corrected quietly. "There's a difference." She looked down at the bag in her hand. Everything she owned that mattered was in it, which meant she was in every practical sense already packed. "I'll need to know the terms in writing," she said. "I'll write them tonight. I'll need Sundays." "You can have Sundays." "And I cook what I decide to cook, not what I'm told to cook." For the first time, something that might have been the beginning of a smile crossed his face. "That's fine by me." Clara took a breath. The summer air tasted like dry grass and something faintly like pine from the mountains above. "All right," she said. "I'll come." The ride up to Walker Ranch took nearly an hour on the Ridge Road, and they made it mostly in silence. Clara sat her borrowed horse. Ethan had brought a second one, she noticed, which meant he had planned for the possibility that she might say yes, and watched the landscape change as they climbed. The town fell away behind them. The noise of it, the opinions of it, the accumulated weight of every sideways look and quiet dismissal she had absorbed in 27 years of living there. All of it thinned out as the altitude increased, until by the time the ranch came into view, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time, like she could breathe properly. The ranch was not grand. She had not expected grand. It was a solid, well-built main house, with a wide porch, a good-sized barn that needed paint, 3 outbuildings in varying states of repair, and a corral where 4 horses watched their arrival with calm professional interest. It was the kind of place that had been built by someone who knew what they were doing, and had been maintained by someone who was working harder than one person could reasonably sustain. Clara took it all in quickly. Habit. Her brain had always worked that way, assessing, cataloging, identifying what needed doing, and in what order. The kitchen garden had been neglected. The porch railing on the left side was loose. The barn door hung slightly off its top hinge. There were tools left out near the corral that should have been stored. Small things, but the kind of small things that piled up. "It's not much," Ethan said, and there was something in his tone that she couldn't quite read. Not apology exactly, more like honesty. "It's a good foundation," Clara said. "The bones are right, it just needs attention." He looked at her sideways. "Most people see it and think it's a lot of work." "It is a lot of work," she said. "That's not the same as saying it's not worth doing." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "No, I suppose it's not." He showed her the house, Her room was at the end of the hall, separated from his by 2 doors, and the length of the entire upper floor. It was small, but well lit, with a window that faced east, and a good solid lock on the door that she tested while he stood in the hallway, and he didn't say anything about the testing, which she appreciated. There was a bed, a chest of drawers, a small writing desk, and a hook on the back of the door for hanging clothes. Simple. Enough. He set a key on the desk. "That's yours," he said. "For the front door and your room both. I had 2 copies made. That's one of them. The other one stays with you even if you decide to leave, so you know there's no version of this where you're locked in." Clara looked at the key. Small piece of iron. Ordinary object. She picked it up. Something about the weight of it, the deliberateness of the gesture. She had to look away for a moment and focus on the window and the mountains beyond it until she had her face back under control. "Thank you," she said. "Supper's your domain," he said, and she could tell he was giving her space to recover without making it obvious that was what he was doing. "I eat simple. I'm not particular. Whatever you decide to make is fine." "What time do you normally eat?" 6 o'clock when I can make it. Sometimes later if there's a problem with the stock." "I'll have something ready at 6, she said. "If you're late, I'll keep a plate warm." He nodded, started to go, stopped at the door. "Miss Bennet," he said. "Clara," she said, because it seemed strange to be formal with the man who had just paid her father's debts and handed her a key and was now giving her a room in his house. "Clara." He said her name once carefully, like he was checking how it fit. "I want you to know what Doss had arranged. What your father agreed to. That's not what this is." She looked at him. "I know you have no particular reason to take me at my word on that," he continued. "I understand that. So I'm not asking you to trust me yet. I'm just asking you to stay long enough to make up your own mind." Clara held the key in her hand. "That," she said, "I can do." The first week was the kind of careful, the kind where 2 people who do not know each other well and have no clear blueprint for what they are to each other move around each other with a particular politeness that is almost formal, but not quite, because there is something underneath it that is not formal at all. Clara threw herself into the work because work was what she knew, and because it gave her something to do with the energy that had nowhere else to go. She fixed the kitchen garden in the first 2 days, working from first light until the heat got too serious to ignore pulling weeds and assessing soil and transplanting the few surviving plants into better positions. She found seed packets in the pantry, some of them old, but some still viable, and she planted them with more hope than certainty. The barn door she rehung herself, which required borrowing tools from the shed and spending 40 minutes, she had not exactly planned to spend, but which she could not let go once she had noticed the problem. Ethan came around the corner of the barn while she was finishing it and stopped. "When did you learn to do that?" he asked. "My mother taught me," she said, testing the swing of the door. She said a woman who couldn't handle basic repairs was a woman at the mercy of other people's availability. He was quiet for a moment. "She sounds like she was a smart woman." "She was the smartest person I've ever known," Clara said. She put the tools down. "She also had more faith in people than the evidence usually warranted, which I haven't decided yet whether to count against her intelligence or not." There was that almost smile again. "She had faith in your father. She had faith in the idea of him," Clara said. "That's a different thing." He thought about that. "I suppose it is." They stood in the morning heat for a moment, not exactly comfortable and not exactly uncomfortable, somewhere in the middle space between strangers and something else. "You didn't have to fix the door," he said. "I know," she said, "but it was bothering me." He looked at the door, looked at her. "The fence on the south pasture is going to bother you something fierce then." She almost smiled. "Show me." By the end of the first week, Clara had begun to understand several things. The first was that Ethan Walker was not what people in town believed him to be. The town had constructed a story about him, the cold mountain hermit, the man who couldn't be talked to, the loner who had something broken in him, And the story, like most stories told about people from a distance, was mostly wrong. He was not cold. He was careful, which looked like coldness until you understood the difference. He was not unfriendly. He simply did not perform friendliness, which was the thing most people meant when they said friendly. He did not fill silence to make other people comfortable. He did not laugh at things that were not funny. He did not pretend to be interested in things that didn't interest him, but he paid attention. That was the thing about him that surprised her most. He noticed the small things. When she mentioned once in passing that the angle of the morning light through the kitchen window made it hard to work at the table, he moved the table 3 inches to the left the following morning without commenting on it. When she had a headache one afternoon, she hadn't said anything, just gone quiet. He had left a glass of water and 2 willow bark tablets on the kitchen counter and gone back outside. Clara began to realize, a man who showed people things rather than telling them. It was an unusual quality. She did not entirely know what to do with it. On the 8th day, Ethan came in from the north pasture in the middle of the afternoon, which was unusual enough that Clara looked up from the accounts she had been organizing. "You have visitors coming," he said. "I beg your pardon. Saw dust from the lower road. 2 riders, coming from town." He set his hat on the hook by the door. "I think it's Doss's men." Clara stood up slowly. "What do they want?" "Nothing good." He looked at her directly. "You don't have to talk to them. You don't have to see them. Say the word, and I'll handle it." She considered that for exactly 3 seconds. "No," she said. "I'll handle it myself." Something in his expression, she couldn't read all of it, but she could read the part that looked like respect. "Then I'll be right outside," he said. The 2 men, she recognized them. Doss's regular hands, the ones who had been at the house the day everything happened, pulled up to the porch and stayed on their horses. It was a deliberate choice. Height, the sense of looking down. Clara stepped out onto the porch and stood at the top of the steps. "Miss Bennet," the taller one said. "Mr. Crane," she said. "Mr. Doss sent you. Mr. Doss wants you to know," Crane said carefully, "that the arrangement with Walker doesn't change certain understandings." "Which understandings?" "That your father's property, the farm, is still in arrears on a separate account. A newer one." Crane pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Recent loan, signed 3 weeks ago, before the debt Walker paid was even settled." Clara felt the cold move through her despite the summer heat. Roy had borrowed again, 3 weeks ago, while she had been there in that house, believing she understood the shape of the problem. "That document," she said carefully, "will need to be examined by a lawyer." "Mr. Doss anticipated that response," Crane said. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that had nothing warm in it. "He wants you to know that he is perfectly willing to allow that examination. He also wants you to know that the property will be seized while it's being examined as standard practice under county code. Your father will have 30 days to vacate." Clara gripped the porch railing. "And what does Mr. Doss want from me?" she said. Because there was always a want. There was always a reason they were here, and not simply handling this through whatever lawyers Doss kept on retainer. Crane looked at her for a long moment. "He wants to know if you'd like to discuss alternatives." The sound of boots on the porch behind her. Ethan Walker stepped up beside her. Not in front of her. Beside her. Shoulder to shoulder positioned so that it was absolutely clear he was with her, but she was the one doing the talking. "She'll be in contact through her attorney," he said pleasantly. "You can tell Doss that, and you can tell him that the county judge's schedule is something I happen to know pretty well, so if he wants to talk about standard practices under county code, I'm happy to have that conversation in the proper setting." Crane's smile faded. He tucked the paper back in his coat. "Good day, Miss Bennet," he said. "Good day," Clara said. They rode away. She watched them until they were gone. "I don't have an attorney," she said quietly. "I know a good one in Billings," Ethan said. "We can write to him tomorrow." She turned to look at him. You knew this was coming, that Doss wouldn't stop. I suspected. You should have told me. He met her eyes. I should have, he said. You're right. I'm sorry. It was such a simple apology. No explanation wrapped around it, no defense. Just acknowledgement. Clara turned back toward the mountains. My father signed another loan, she said. 3 weeks ago. Yes. He knew what he was doing. Yes. She was quiet for a long time. The summer wind moved through the grass. From the barn, one of the horses called out, and another answered. I need to think, she said finally. Take all the time you need, he said. He went back inside and left her standing on the porch with the mountains in front of her and the mess of her family behind her and the strange, solid, unexpected territory of whatever this place was turning out to be all around her. She stood there until the sun started to drop and the heat eased and the first stars came out over the peaks, and then for the first time in a very long time she did not feel completely alone. Later that night, after supper had been eaten and the dishes done and the kitchen quiet, Clara found Ethan sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand and his eyes on the dark shape of the mountains. She sat in the other chair without asking. He didn't seem to mind. Can I ask you something? She said. You can ask me anything, he said. The 5 times we spoke, she said. I remember 4 of them. The market in 79. The church social in 81 when it rained. The road outside the general store in 83 when your horse threw a shoe. And the day my mother's funeral was when you were the only person from outside town who came. She paused. What was the 5th? He was quiet for a while. You wouldn't remember it, he said. You were having a hard day. Someone in town had said something unkind to you. I didn't hear what, just the tone of it. And you were walking back from the dry goods store, and there was a dog on the corner astray, and it was hurt, limping badly. Most people were walking past it. Clara went still. You stopped, he said. You put down everything you were carrying, and you sat down on the ground, right there in the middle of the street, in your good dress, and you checked the dog's leg. You found the burr that was stuck in its paw, and you worked it out, which took you about 10 minutes because the dog didn't trust you at first. And when you were done and the dog walked away, you just picked up your bags and kept going. She didn't say anything. You never looked to see if anyone was watching, he said. You just did it because it needed doing. Clara stared at her hands. That was 1880, she said quietly. October, he said. You were wearing a brown coat with brass buttons. The weight of 7 years settled around them both. Ethan, she said. And then she didn't know what else to say. You don't have to say anything, he said. I'm not telling you that to put something on you. I just thought... He stopped. Tried again. I thought you should know that someone noticed. Even when you didn't think anyone was paying attention. Someone always was. The stars were very bright above the mountains. The coffee in his cup had long gone cold, and Clara Bennett, who had been sold and saved and transplanted to a mountain she had never planned to live on, sat in the dark with a man who had watched her be kind in an empty street 16 years ago and had never entirely stopped thinking about it. She did not know yet what to do with that. But for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, she thought that perhaps she had time to figure it out. The morning after their conversation on the porch, Clara woke before the sun, not because she had slept badly, but because her mind had already started working before the rest of her had caught up. She lay in the narrow bed in the east-facing room and stared at the ceiling and thought about a woman in a brown coat with brass buttons sitting in the middle of a street working a burr out of a stray dog's paw, while a man she barely knew watched from somewhere she had never noticed and remembered it for 16 years. She did not know what to do with that, so she did what she always did when she didn't know what to do with something. She got up and went to work. The kitchen was cold at that hour. She built the fire in the stove efficiently, the way her mother had taught her paper kindling. The 2 medium logs crossed at an angle to let the air move through. And while the heat built, she started the coffee and assessed what the pantry had to offer. Ethan Walker had provisions, she would give him that. The man ate simply, but he kept his stores well. flour salt pork, dried beans, a decent amount of preserved fruit, eggs from the small flock of hens she had discovered behind the barn on her second day. She made biscuits. It was not a complicated decision. When in doubt, biscuits. Her mother had said that too. She was pulling the first pan from the oven when she heard his boots on the stairs. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. "You didn't have to start this early," he said. "I was awake," she said. "Coffee's ready." He came in and poured himself a cup and stood at the kitchen counter and drank it without sitting down the way she had already learned he did every morning, and she set the biscuits on the table, and they ate breakfast together in the particular quiet that had become in the space of barely more than a week their ordinary thing. It was strange, Clara thought, how quickly ordinary things established themselves. "I've been thinking about the attorney," she said when the first cup was done. "Hargrove," he said. "James Hargrove in Billings. He handled a land dispute for my neighbor Calhoun 2 years ago. Man knows county code better than most judges. Can he be trusted?" Ethan looked at her over his cup. In this territory, that's always the right question to ask first. He considered. "Yes, I believe so. He doesn't take Doss's money, which narrows the field considerably. How soon can we reach him? I can ride to the telegraph office in town this morning and send a wire. We'd have a response by tomorrow day after at the latest." Clara turned her coffee cup in her hands. "I'd like to come with you." He looked at her steadily. He didn't say what she could see. He was thinking that going back to town meant dealing with people who had watched her humiliated 4 days ago, that Ridgeline was the kind of small place where stories calcified fast into permanent fact, and the story they had already built about Clara Bennett was not a kind one. "All right," he said simply. She appreciated that. She appreciated it considerably. They rode into Ridgeline at 9:30, and Clara felt the shift in the air the moment they reached the main street. Not the temperature, it was already hot, the summer bearing down without apology, but the quality of attention. The way eyes moved. The way conversations paused and then resumed at a slightly different pitch. People watched them ride in together. She had expected that. What she had not expected was Margaret Holt. Margaret ran the dry goods store her late husband had left her, and she had the particular authority of a woman who had survived long enough in a small town to have seen most things and judge most of them. She was standing outside her store when Ethan and Clara tied their horses, and she looked at Clara with an expression that Clara could not immediately read. "Clara Bennett," Margaret said. "Mrs. Holt," Clara said carefully. "I heard what Doss tried to do." Margaret's voice was flat. "And I heard that Walker here put a stop to it." She nodded at Ethan without quite looking at him. "I also heard your father signed a new loan 3 weeks back." Clara went still. News travels fast. In this town it travels faster than the mail. Margaret crossed her arms. "I want you to know something. What happened at your place, what Doss arranged, that's not something I was part of. And there are others in this town who feel the same way, even if they're not saying it out loud yet." "What are they waiting for?" Clara asked, and she did not mean it unkindly, just honestly. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "They're waiting to see if you're going to fold," she said. "Same as always. This town watches people fold. It's become something of a habit." She paused. "I don't think you're going to." Clara held the older woman's gaze. "No, ma'am," she said. "I don't plan to." Something shifted in Margaret's expression. Not quite approval, something more cautious than that, but in the same direction. "Good," she said. "Then come find me if you need anything. I mean that." She went back inside without waiting for a response. Ethan stood beside Clara on the boardwalk. "That," he said quietly, "is the most words I've heard Margaret Holt say at one time in probably 3 years. "She's testing me," Clara said. "She's deciding about you," he said. "Different thing. Come on." The telegraph office was 2 doors down from the post office, and the man behind the counter, a young man named Peter, with ink-stained fingers and a look of permanent mild anxiety, took their wire to Hargrove without comment, though Clara could see him reading it as he wrote it down and processing what it meant. By the time they stepped back out onto the boardwalk, 3 more people had found reasons to be near the telegraph office. Clara recognized all of them. Will Crane's wife, Sarah, who had been at church the day Clara's mother was buried and had not spoken to her afterward. The eldest Marsh boy, who managed one of Doss's grain contracts and knew which way his bread was buttered. And coming around the corner from the direction of the bank, Harlan Doss himself. She had not expected that. Neither, she could tell from the slight shift in his posture, had Ethan. Doss stopped when he saw them. His expression did not change significantly. It never did. But there was a recalibration happening behind his eyes that Clara had learned to recognize. "Walker," he said. "Miss Bennett." A pause. "I heard you were in town." "You have good ears," Clara said. "I have attentive employees," Doss corrected pleasantly. He looked at Clara with the particular look of a man who has decided you are a problem, but has not yet determined the best approach to solving you. "I hope there are no hard feelings about the other day. Business arrangements can be complicated." "Selling a woman to pay a debt isn't complicated," Clara said. "It's just wrong." Something flickered in Doss's face. Gone immediately, but it had been there. "Your father made his own choices," Doss said carefully. "My father made his choices with a great deal of help from you," Clara said. "And I intend to have a very detailed conversation about that with James Hargrove in Billings, who I understand is familiar with county lending practices and the particular way they've been applied in this territory over the past several years." Silence. The Marsh boy had stopped pretending to be passing by. Sarah Crane had not moved. Doss looked at Clara for a long moment. Then he looked at Ethan. Then back at Clara. "You've found your feet quickly," he said, and it was almost a compliment, except for the edge underneath it. "I always had them," Clara said. "I just didn't have anywhere solid to stand." Doss tipped his hat the correct form, the proper gesture the surface of civility, and walked past them without another word. Clara did not let herself breathe until he was past. Beside her, Ethan said nothing, but his shoulder was close enough to hers that she could feel the warmth of him, and that was, she found, considerably more steadying than she wanted to admit. They had intended to ride straight back to the ranch, but at the edge of town, Clara pulled her horse up. "I need to go to the farm," she said. Ethan looked at her. "I need to talk to my father," she said. "Before the attorney gets involved. Before this becomes something that can't be walked back from. I need to look at him and understand what he actually did." "Clara, I know," she said. "I know what you're going to say, and you're probably right. But he's still my father." He was quiet for a moment. "You want me to come?" She thought about it. "Yes," she said finally. "But stay back. This needs to be between us first." He nodded. "I'll wait at the fence." The Bennett farm looked smaller than she remembered. She had only been gone 9 days. But something about having left, having been forced to see the place from the outside rather than living inside it, had shifted its dimensions. The house that had always been just the house, the fence that had always been just the fence, the yard where she had spent most of her life. All of it looked like what it actually was, rather than what familiarity had let her believe. Roy Bennett was in the barn when she arrived. He heard her horse and came to the door, and when he saw her, his face did something complicated. "Clara," he said. "Pa," she said. She dismounted and stood in the yard and looked at him. "Tell me about the loan." He had the grace to not pretend he didn't know what she was talking about. He leaned against the barn doorframe and looked at the ground, and in the bend of his shoulders she could see not just guilt, but something older. Something that had been there for a long time and had just become visible. "3 weeks ago," she said, "while I was in that house watching you let Doss arrange my life for me, you were signing a new loan. I needed—" He stopped. "The back 40 has been failing for 2 years. You know that. I needed to pay the seed suppliers or they wouldn't extend credit again, and we'd lose the whole— You should have told me. You had enough to worry about. I had enough to worry about—" She heard her own voice climb and made herself bring it back down. "Pa, I have managed this farm for 6 years. 6 years. I kept it running after Mama died. I stretched every dollar you gave me, and I made decisions you never knew about because you weren't in a state to make them yourself. And you didn't tell me you had borrowed more money because I had enough to worry about." He was quiet. "I would have helped you find another way," she said. "If you had come to me, if you had just talked to me, we could have—" She stopped, because she was not entirely sure that was true. And she had never been someone who said things she wasn't sure of just because they were easier. "Maybe we couldn't have fixed it, but I should have had the chance." "I know," he said, quietly. "I know that." "Why Doss?" she said. "Of all the people you could have gone to. The church has an assistance fund. The county bank has extended credit before. The Harmons would have—" "Because Doss was there," Roy said. "And he didn't ask hard questions. And I was ashamed." His voice cracked on the last word, thin and dry as dead wood. "I was ashamed, Clara. I didn't want anyone to know how bad it had gotten. With Doss, I could pretend it was just business, just paperwork." Clara stood in the yard and looked at her father, and she wanted to be angry. She had every right to be angry. The anger was there, real and legitimate and fully earned. But underneath it was something older and more complicated. The grief of understanding that the parent you needed your whole life was never quite the person they could have been. That the gap between who they were and who you had needed them to be was not something that could be fixed or filled, only accepted. "I love you, Pa," she said. "That hasn't changed." He looked up. "But I cannot fix this for you. I can't keep fixing things for you. I am going to work with an attorney to look at what Doss's claims on this property actually are legally, and if there's a way to protect what you have left, I will help you find it. But I need you to be honest with me from this point, about everything. No more secrets. No more decisions you make without telling me because you're ashamed." Roy Bennett nodded. He looked, she thought, both smaller and more real than he had in a long time. "One more thing," she said. "What you agreed to, with Doss, signing me over." He closed his eyes. "Did it occur to you," she said quietly, "even for one moment to ask me first?" The silence lasted a long time. "No," he said finally. "It didn't." Clara breathed in, breathed out. "I'll be in touch about the attorney," she said. "Take care of yourself." She turned and walked back to her horse. Ethan was waiting at the fence line as promised. He read her face when she rode up. She could see him reading it, and he asked nothing, just turned his horse and rode beside her back toward the ridge road. They were halfway up the mountain before she said anything. "He didn't think to ask me," she said. "He just didn't think of it." Ethan said nothing, which was the right thing. "That's the part I keep coming back to," she said. "Not the loan, not even the arrangement with Doss, just it didn't occur to him. I wasn't part of the calculation. I was the calculation." She paused. "Do you know how many meals I made in that kitchen? How many times I sat up with the accounts until 2 in the morning trying to find money that wasn't there? How many seasons I planned and planted and harvested and—" She stopped, and at the end of it I was still just something to be signed over. "Yes," Ethan said. "That's all you have to say." "What would you like me to say?" She thought about it. "Nothing, I suppose," she said. "There isn't anything to say." "There's one thing," he said carefully. "It's not true. What he made you feel by doing that. It's not true. You are not a thing to be signed. You were never that." He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "But I don't think me saying it is the thing that's going to make you believe it." "What will—" "Time," he said, "and evidence. The kind you collect yourself." Clara considered that for the rest of the ride up the mountain, and she did not entirely disagree. The response from James Hargrove arrived the following afternoon, brought up from town by the general store's delivery boy, who handled the telegraph service for the outlying ranches. Clara read it twice, standing in the yard, and then carried it inside to where Ethan was repairing a broken bridle at the kitchen table. "He's coming Thursday," she said. Ethan looked up. That was fast. He says he's been building a case against Doss's lending practices for over a year. He says we are not the first family. She set the telegram on the table. He says there are 7 other families in this county who have been affected. He wants to talk to all of them, together. Ethan put the bridle down slowly. "Together," he said. "That's what he says." "Doss is not going to like that." "No," Clara said. "I don't imagine he is." They looked at each other across the kitchen table. "This is bigger than my father's debt," Clara said. "It always was," Ethan said. "I've known that for a while. I just didn't have a way to move on it alone." She studied him. "You knew about the other families. I knew about some of them. The Harmons lost their East Field last spring in a way that didn't make legal sense to me. The Wickers had their mill contract pulled, with 2 weeks' notice after 15 years. I didn't have the legal knowledge to understand what Doss was actually doing, but I knew the pattern. Why didn't you do something sooner?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I'm one man on a mountain," he said. "And Doss has the council and the contracts and 20 years of entrenched position in this town. I couldn't fight that alone. No one can." He looked at her directly. "But 7 families with an attorney who knows county code, that's different." Clara sat down at the table across from him. "You've been waiting," she said slowly. "For the right moment. For the right—" She stopped. "For the right circumstances," he said carefully. She looked at him for a long time. "Is that why you came to the farm that morning? Not just for me. Not just because of Doss and what he was trying to do." "It was mostly because of you," he said quietly. "The rest of it, yes. I won't pretend otherwise. When I heard what Doss had arranged, I saw a way to do 2 things at once. Help you and start unraveling what he's been doing to this county." He held her gaze steadily. "I should have told you that earlier. That's the second thing I've needed to tell you and didn't." Clara absorbed that. "You're honest," she said finally. "I try to be. Most people aren't. When they've done something with 2 reasons, they only tell you the one that sounds better." "I figured you'd find out the other one eventually," he said. "And I'd rather you hear it from me." She looked at the telegram on the table between them. 7 families. A year-long pattern. An attorney already building something. "I want to help with this," she said. "Not just for my father's farm, for the Harmons and the Wickers and whoever else Doss has done this to." "I know," he said. "Is that all right with you?" He looked at her with something in his expression that was open in a way she hadn't seen on him yet. "Clara," he said, "you don't need my permission for a single thing you want to do." Thursday came with a heat that sat on the mountain like something solid, and James Hargrove arrived at Walker Ranch at 11 in the morning, a trim man in his 50s, with a careful way of talking, and the kind of eyes that had seen a great many contracts and a great many people trying to escape from them. He shook Clara's hand first, which she noticed, and then Ethan's, and he sat at the kitchen table, with his papers spread out, and talked for 2 hours. It was, Clara thought, the most clarifying 2 hours she had experienced in some time. What Doss had been doing was not. Hargrove explained illegal on the surface. Each individual loan, each individual contract, each individual claim was documentable and defensible in isolation. The illegality, and there was illegality. Hargrove was clear on that, was in the pattern. The way loans were structured to be nearly impossible to repay. The way second loans were offered at the moment, when families were too desperate to read the small writing. The way council positions gave Doss advanced knowledge of which land would increase in value so that he could target the families who owned it. "What you're describing," Clara said, "is a system." "Exactly," Hargrove said. "And that's what makes it prosecutable at the federal level rather than just the county level. Which means it goes to a judge who is not beholden to your local council." "How long?" Ethan said. "To build the full case. Several months if the other families are willing to cooperate. Some of them are afraid. And understandably so. Doss still controls a great deal in this county. But not everything, Clara said. Hargrove looked at her. No, not everything. I'll talk to the Harmon family, Clara said. I know Eleanor Harmon. She'll listen to me. She looked at Ethan. You said you knew the Wickers. Tom Wicker. Yes, we've helped each other with stock a few times. Then we start there, Clara said. 2 families this week. We're honest with them about what's involved and what the risks are, and we let them decide for themselves. Hargrove made a note. Miss Bennett, I should be clear, this will make you a visible opponent of Doss's operation. That comes with risk. Mr. Hargrove, she said, Harlan Doss tried to buy me to settle my father's debt. The risk started 9 days ago. I'd rather face it standing up. Hargrove studied her over his papers. Ethan, he said without looking away from Clara. Wherever did you find her? She was always here, Ethan said quietly. I was just lucky enough to finally show up at the right time. Clara looked at him. He looked back. There were approximately 17 things happening in that look, and she wasn't ready to address any of them yet, so she looked back at Hargrove and said, When can you speak to the families directly? The first threat arrived that same evening. They were still at the table with Hargrove's papers when they heard a horse in the yard. Ethan was up into the window before Clara had time to ask who it was. One rider, he said. Not Doss's men. Don't know him. He went to the door. Clara followed. The rider was young, 20, maybe 22, with the kind of expression that said he'd been paid to deliver something and was nervous about it. He held out an envelope without getting off his horse. For Walker, he said. And the Bennett woman. Ethan took it. He opened it where he stood in the doorway, and Clara read it over his arm because she was not about to stand back and wait to be told. It was short. Some arrangements once made have a way of becoming permanent. It would be unfortunate if the difficulty were to find its way to those who caused it. Consider carefully. No signature. Clara read it twice. Then she took it from Ethan's hand, walked back to the kitchen table, and set it down in front of Hargrove. I believe, she said calmly, you'll want to add this to your file. Hargrove looked at it, looked at her. A slow, considering look that carried within it something that might have been satisfaction. Yes, he said. I believe I will. Behind her, she heard Ethan send the rider away. She heard him come back inside. She heard him stand in the kitchen doorway while she and Hargrove talked through the implications, and she felt without looking the quality of his attention. The way it was steady. The way it had always been steady, she was beginning to understand, even before she had known enough to notice it. 7 years, he had said. She was starting to think that number meant something different than she had first assumed. Not 7 years of waiting for an opportunity. Not 7 years of planning. 7 years of a man noticing a woman's small kindnesses and finding them quietly and without any particular agenda, impossible to forget. Clara did not know what to do with that, but she was beginning to think she wanted to find out. That night, after Hargrove had gone and the papers were put away, and the kitchen was clean and quiet, Clara found herself standing in the doorway of the room at the end of the hall with the key in her hand. Not because she was going anywhere, just because she needed to feel the weight of it, the solidity of the choice it represented. She could hear Ethan on the porch again, the familiar sound of him settling into the chair, the quiet that he generated that was different from the quiet generated by absence. It had texture to it, presence, the specific quality of a person choosing to be still. She thought about going out. She thought about what she would say if she did. She thought about 17 things she was not ready for, and 3 or 4 she might be. And then she put the key in her pocket and went to bed. Tomorrow she thought there was work to do. There were families to visit and a case to build, and a man named Doss who had made a significant tactical error in underestimating the woman he had tried to turn into currency. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. She fell asleep before the stars moved much. And for the first time in longer than she could clearly account for, she did not dream about anything frightening. She dreamed about a brown coat with brass buttons and a stray dog walking away healed into an ordinary morning. And somewhere in the dream she understood without being told that she had always been seen. She had just needed somewhere safe enough to finally believe it. The Eleanor Harmon visit did not go the way Clara had planned. She had expected reluctance. She had expected fear, the reasonable, grounded kind that came from watching a powerful man dismantle your livelihood over several years while the people around you looked away. She had expected to spend time earning trust before anything useful could happen. What she had not expected was to find Eleanor Harmon already waiting for her. Not literally waiting. Eleanor hadn't known Clara was coming. But when Clara rode up to the Harmon place that Friday morning with Ethan, a respectful half-length behind her, Eleanor came off her porch with the look of a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had just spotted someone strong enough to help her set it down. "I heard you stood up to Crane on the main street," Eleanor said before Clara had finished dismounting. "In front of God and half the town. Told him you had an attorney." "I do have an attorney," Clara said. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. She was 53 years old and had the hands of someone who had worked land their whole life and the eyes of someone who had watched that land slowly be taken from them and had not yet found a way to stop it. "Come inside," Eleanor said. "I'll put coffee on." What came out over the next 2 hours was worse than Clara had anticipated. The Harmon family hadn't just lost their east field to a DOS loan gone wrong. They had lost the water rights to the stream that fed the rest of their property, a separate transaction handled through a county council subcommittee vote that Roy Harmon hadn't known about until the paperwork was already filed. Without the water rights, the remaining land would be functionally worthless within 2 dry seasons. "He doesn't take the land at once," Eleanor said. Her voice was steady, but her hands around her coffee cup were not. "He takes pieces of it. One piece, then you need another loan to survive without that piece, and then he takes the collateral on that loan, and then you need another. He's patient. That's the terrible thing about him. He is so very patient." "He doesn't have to be in a hurry," Clara said. "He has the council. He has the contracts. He controls the timeline. Until now," Ethan said from his chair by the wall, quiet but definite. Eleanor looked at him. "You really think this attorney can do something?" "Hargrove has been building this case for over a year," Clara said. "He has documentation on the lending pattern. What he needs is testimony from the families who lived through it, yours included." "If I testify against Doss?" Eleanor stopped, started again. "Roy's afraid. He won't say so because Roy hasn't said a frightened thing out loud in 30 years. But I know what afraid looks like in a man's back when he thinks I'm not watching." "I know," Clara said. "And I won't pretend there isn't risk. There is. But Eleanor," she leaned forward slightly, "he's going to take the rest of it anyway. If we do nothing, he takes everything, and we just let it happen quietly. At least this way we have a chance." Eleanor was quiet for a long time. "What does your attorney need from me?" she said finally. Clara exhaled. "A meeting, documents if you have them, and your word that you'll tell Hargrove exactly what you told me." "I can do that," Eleanor said. She straightened in her chair, and it was a small movement, but it changed the whole shape of her. Something resolving. "I can do all of that." Riding back up the mountain that afternoon, Ethan said, "That's one." "The Wicker's next," Clara said. "Tom Wicker is a harder case. He's proud. He won't want to admit how far things have gone." "Then we don't ask him to admit it," Clara said. "We just tell him what we found and let him decide what it means." Ethan looked at her sideways. "When did you get so good at reading people?" "I've been managing my father for 6 years, she said. "It was educational." Tom Wicker was as predicted proud. He met them at his fence line when they rode up Saturday morning, which was a message in itself, not inviting them in, keeping the meeting external controllable. He was a broad-shouldered man of 60, with a white mustache and the expression of someone who had strong opinions about most things and was not particularly interested in revising them. "Walker," he said, Then looking at Clara, Miss Bennet. "Mr. Wicker," Clara said, "I won't take much of your time." "Good," he said, "because I don't have much to give." She told him about Hargrove, about the 7 families, about the pattern Hargrove had documented. She told him about the water rights transaction that had taken the Harmons' stream access through a council subcommittee vote, and she watched his expression change when she got to that part, a small tightening around the eyes that told her he was connecting something he hadn't connected before. "What kind of subcommittee vote?" he said. "County Infrastructure Review Committee," Clara said. 3 members, 2 of them DOS appointees. Tom Wicker looked at his fence post for a moment. "My mill contract," he said slowly. "The one that got pulled 2 years ago. It went through a county supply review committee." "How many members?" A pause. 3. 2 of them were men DOS recommended for the position the previous year. Silence. "He's been using the council apparatus as a legal mechanism," Ethan said carefully. "Gives every decision a procedural cover. Hard to challenge an individual transaction when it's been formally voted on." "Unless," Clara said, "you can show that the voting members had a financial relationship with the person who benefited from the vote." Tom Wicker turned that over slowly. "That would be corruption," Clara said. "Yes." Another silence. "I want to talk to your attorney," Tom Wicker said. Clara did not let herself smile. "I'll arrange it." By Wednesday of the following week, Hargrove had met with 4 families. By Friday, 5. The 6th, the Preston family agreed to participate after Eleanor Harmon made a personal visit to their farm, which Clara had quietly suggested might be more effective than a letter from an attorney, and which turned out to be correct. The 7th family was harder. The Calloways had been the longest established family in the county after the DOS operation, and Nathaniel Calloway, 68 years old, deeply stubborn, and carrying a personal humiliation about his situation that had made him hostile to any suggestion of outside help, had sent Hargrove's initial inquiry back unopened. Clara went alone. Ethan offered to come. She said no. She had a reason for going alone, and the reason was that Nathaniel Calloway was a man who had been stripped of control over his own situation, and bringing another man to his door would confirm every defensive story he had already built about what was happening to him. So she went alone on a Monday morning, and she knocked on the door, and when Nathaniel Calloway opened it and saw her standing there by herself, something in his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "my name is Clara Bennet. I grew up in Ridgeline. My father borrowed money from Harlan Doss that he couldn't repay, and Doss arranged to take me as payment. A week and a half ago, I was supposed to leave my home as property. I'm not telling you that to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because I want you to know that I understand what it is to have someone decide your life for you, and I'm done letting that happen." Nathaniel Calloway stared at her. "I'm not here to save you," she said. "I'm here because a lawyer named Hargrove is building a case against Doss that could actually succeed. And without your family's situation in the documentation, there's a piece of the pattern that's harder to prove. I need what happened to you, not for me, for every family after you that Doss would have gone on to do the same thing to." He did not speak for a long moment. "Come in," he said finally. "My wife just made coffee." The day Hargrove gathered all 7 families in Margaret Holt's dry goods store, which Margaret had offered, without being asked, simply showing up at the ranch one morning and telling Clara she had cleared the back room for the meeting, was the day Doss made his first serious mistake. He sent men to watch the building, not subtle about it. 2 men on horses positioned on the street in clear sight. Message received, message intended, "We know what you're doing. We are watching, adjust your behavior accordingly." Clara saw them when she arrived. She looked at them for a count of 3. Then she walked to the hitching post nearest them tied. Her horse looked directly at the closer of the 2 men and said, "Good morning. Mr. Hargrove will be taking your names for the court record if you're still here when the meeting lets out." The man opened his mouth, closed it. "Just so you're aware," Clara said pleasantly, and went inside. Margaret Holt, who had witnessed this exchange from her doorway, said, Lord Girl, under her breath, and Clara was almost certain it was a compliment. Inside all 7 families. All 14 or more of the adults who had agreed to come filling Margaret's back room with the particular quality of gathered people who have individually been afraid for a long time and are only now discovering that they are not alone in it. Hargrove stood at the front of the room. Clara stood to the side because this was his moment professionally, but she watched the faces. She watched Roy Harmon's back straighten when Hargrove explained the council mechanism. She watched Eleanor's eyes fill and then clear. She watched Tom Wicker's jaw set when he understood the full shape of what had been done to his mill contract. She watched Nathaniel Calloway reach for his wife's hand under the table and grip it. She watched 7 families understand, maybe for the first time, that they had not failed. They had been failed by a system designed to look like fairness while functioning as anything but. The Federal Circuit Court, Hargrove said, has jurisdiction in cases of systematic financial fraud that crosses county boundaries. Doss's operations touch 4 counties. That is our venue. And that is where county council appointments and local procedural cover become irrelevant. How long, Roy Harmon asked. If we file within the month, a hearing could be scheduled before winter. And until then, Nathaniel Calloway said, he's still here. He still controls the grain contracts. He still controls the water assessments. He still controls the things he controls. Hargrove agreed carefully. I won't pretend otherwise, but here is what changes the moment we file. Every action he takes against any of you from that point forward becomes potential evidence of retaliation, which is an additional federal charge. He knows that, and he is not a stupid man. He'll be careful, Clara said from the side of the room. Everyone looked at her. He's always been careful. That's been his whole method. But careful gets harder when you're being watched by someone who understands what you're doing. She paused. He's been counting on isolation. Each family alone, too ashamed or too afraid to talk to the others. We just ended that. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Eleanor Harmon said, I want to sign whatever needs signing. And one by one, around the table, so did everyone else. The second threat came that same evening, more serious than the first. Clara was in the kitchen after supper when she heard Ethan's boots stop in a particular way in the hallway. Not the ordinary stop, the one that meant he had something to say, but a sharper one, the kind associated with a decision already made. She came out to find him holding a piece of paper that had been nailed to the barn door. She read it. It was not a veiled suggestion this time. The woman living at Walker Ranch should consider whether she is willing to accept consequences for others as well as herself. Her father's remaining property can be seized by end of week under existing loan terms. The families she has been speaking with have outstanding obligations that can be called immediately. Consider this carefully before the next meeting. Clara read it twice. He's threatening the other families, she said. Yes, through me. He's making me responsible for what happens to them. That's the intent, Ethan said. She set the paper down on the kitchen table. Her hands were steady. Inside, she was not entirely steady, but her hands were, and at the moment, that was the part that mattered. He knows, she said. About the meeting today, about Hargrove, about the filing. He probably knew before the meeting was over. He had 2 men watching the building. Then he knows we're not going to stop. She looked at Ethan. He's trying to make me feel like stopping is the responsible thing, like continuing is me choosing to hurt people. Yes, Ethan said. That's exactly what he's doing. It's effective, she said honestly. I'm sitting here thinking about Eleanor Harmon and the Calloways, and what happens to them if Doss calls their notes early and yes. It's working on me. What are you going to do? He said. She looked at him. I'm going to call Hargrove first thing tomorrow and tell him to file immediately. Not at the end of the month. Now. Because Doss just threatened multiple families in writing through an intermediary, and Hargrove said that kind of retaliation was an additional federal charge. She paused. We don't pull back. We move faster. Something happened in Ethan's face. What? She said. Nothing, he said. He stopped. Tried again. When I came down to your father's farm that morning, I had a plan. I knew what I thought the next steps would be, what needed to happen, and in what order. He looked at her directly. You've moved faster and thought clearer than anything I planned. I want you to know that. I'm not leading this. You are. Clara looked at him for a moment. We are, she said. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. There is. She picked up the threatening letter and folded it precisely and put it in the pocket of her apron next to the key. I'm going to write to Hargrove tonight. If you can ride to town tomorrow morning with the letter, I'd appreciate it. I'll go at first light, he said. Thank you. She started back toward the kitchen. Stopped. Ethan. Yes. Have you eaten? A pause. Not yet. Sit down, she said. I'll make something. We'll figure out the letter together. She heard him pull out the kitchen chair behind her, heard him sit, heard the particular settling sound of a man who has been carrying something heavy by himself and has for the moment put it down. She made cornbread and heated the leftover beans from the day before, and they sat across from each other at the kitchen table with the threatening letter between them and a lamp turned up high, and they wrote to Hargrove while the summer night pressed warm against the windows. At one point, Ethan said, "You should say it exactly like you said it to me, about moving faster." You think that's what he needs to hear? I think Hargrove is a careful man by nature, Ethan said. I think careful men sometimes need someone to say plainly that the time for careful has passed. Clara considered that. You're right. She added a line to the letter. He leaned across slightly to read it. His shoulder was close to hers in the lamplight. Neither of them moved away. Hargrove filed on Thursday. Doss found out by Friday morning, which meant someone in the Federal Circuit Office had a relationship with Doss's operation information. Hargrove noted with grim professional interest and filed away for later. What Doss did with the information was immediate and visible. He called 3 loan notes early. Not the Harmon note, not the Calloway note. Both of those would have looked too directly retaliatory given the timing. He chose 3 smaller families who had not joined the action. Families on the edge of the arrangement, people who had been watching but not yet committed. Message: this is what happens to people near the fire. You don't have to be in the fire to get burned. Clara heard about it from Margaret Holt, who sent her nephew up the Ridge Road with a note on Saturday morning. She read the note at the kitchen table and sat with it for 5 minutes and then went to find Ethan in the barn. He called the Fenner loan, she said, and the Daily note and the Morrison family's equipment credit. Ethan straightened from where he was working on the fence repair. None of those 3 are in the case. No, that's the point. She looked at him. He can't touch the 7 families directly without adding to his federal exposure. So he's going after people adjacent to us, showing everyone what proximity to this fight costs. Can Hargrove protect them? Not legally. Their loans are separate. The notes were legitimate. She paused. But if those families join the case, their outstanding loans become part of the pattern documentation, Ethan said. And Doss calling them immediately after the filing becomes additional evidence of retaliation against potential witnesses. She held his gaze. I need to ride to the Fenner place today. I'll come with you. All 3 families if we can make it to them all before dark. He checked the angle of the sun through the barn door. We can make it. They made it. The Fenner family, the Dolleys and the Morrisons all listened. All 3 were frightened in a way that the original 7 hadn't quite been. These people hadn't chosen to be involved, and being punished for proximity to someone else's fight had a particular kind of injustice that hit differently than being targeted directly. Clara did not minimize that. She didn't tell them it would be fine. She told them exactly what joining the case would mean, that their loans would be documented, that Hargrove would have additional evidence that Doss calling their notes the week of the federal filing would look exactly like what it was, and that there was real legal argument for those notes being suspended pending the federal investigation. If we lose, Clara said to James Fenner, standing in the yard of a farm that had been in his family for 22 years. "You're no worse off than you are right now. He's already called your note. You've already lost that protection. The only direction from here is forward." James Fenner was quiet for a long time. "My daughter was born in that house," he said. "I know," Clara said. "My father built the barn." "I know. What are the actual odds, Miss Bennet?" "Not the reassuring version. The real one." She looked at him steadily. "Hargrove says better than even with 10 families. Better still if any of the council members can be shown to have received direct financial benefit from the votes they cast. He's working on that separately." She paused. "I won't promise you we win. I can promise you we fight. And I can promise you that whatever happens, you won't face it alone." Fenner looked at his barn, at the house, at the summer-dried field that had needed rain for 3 weeks and hadn't gotten it. "All right," he said. "Where do I sign?" They were riding back up the mountain in the last of the evening light when Ethan said, 10 families. "Yes," Clara said. "You did that in 2 weeks." She looked at the road ahead. "We did that." "Clara." His voice had a different quality than usual. Careful in a way that was different from his ordinary careful. "I need to tell you something." She looked at him. "The night before I came to your father's farm," he said, "I'd heard about what Doss had arranged. Crane had been talking at the feed store, and I was in the next aisle, and he didn't know I was there." He paused. "I had already been thinking about the families, about Hargrove, about finding a way to move against Doss's operation. I told you that, and it's true." "But," she said, "but I want to be honest that there was a moment before I'd thought about the legal strategy, before I'd thought about any of it when I heard your name. When I heard what they had agreed to do with you." He kept his eyes on the road. "And the whole rest of it came later. The 7 families and Hargrove and the federal case. All of that came after. The first thing, the only thing for about 30 seconds, was just your name. And knowing I had to do something about it." The summer evening had turned the mountains gold and amber. Clara held the reins in her hands and thought about 7 years. About a brown coat and a stray dog, and a man who had never forgotten an ordinary act of kindness in a street where he thought no one was watching. "I know," she said quietly. He looked at her. "I've been figuring that out gradually," she said. "The way it happened. What came first?" She paused. "I'm not angry about it. I want you to know that. The legal strategy is real and it matters, and I'm grateful we found a way to do both things at once. But knowing that you came for me first..." She stopped. Let the sentence go where it needed to go, even though it went somewhere she was not entirely accustomed to going. "That matters to me, more than I know quite what to do with yet." They rode in silence for a while. "Yet," Ethan said. Not a question, not pressure, just the words set down carefully between them. "Yet," Clara confirmed. And in the space of that word, something that had been building slowly and quietly, and with great patience, the way the best things build, the way mountains build one layer at a time over seasons, moved an inch closer to being named. The fire started at 2 in the morning. Clara woke to the smell of it before the sound. The particular sharp wrongness of smoke where smoke shouldn't be, and she was out of bed and at her window before she was fully awake. The barn. The east end of the barn, orange and climbing fast already past the point where one person could handle it alone. She ran. She was through the back door and across the yard before she had time to be afraid, and she was screaming Ethan's name as she ran, because he slept light and would hear her, and because the horses were in that barn. He came off the porch on her second shout, already dressed, or close enough, taking in the situation in one look without speaking. "Horses," she said. "I know," he said. "Get the water buckets from the fence. I'll start from the back." What followed was 40 minutes that Clara would never be able to describe in the correct sequence. Because it didn't happen in sequence, it happened all at once. Heat and sound and the terrible noise of frightened horses and the weight of water buckets and smoke that got into her lungs and wouldn't leave, and Ethan appearing and disappearing in the orange light as he moved back and forth with a focus that was almost frightening in its completeness. 3 of the 4 horses got out. The 4th, the oldest one, a gray mare named Patience that Ethan had had for 11 years, refused the door twice before Clara went back in for her. She didn't think about it. She went in because the horse was there and panicking, and needed someone to be calmer than she was, and Clara took hold of her halter and talked to her in the low, continuous voice her mother had taught her to use with frightened animals, and got her out. She came out of the smoke into the yard, and the horse pulled away, and the fire had spread to the roof, and Ethan caught Clara's arm and pulled her back from the heat. They stood in the yard. The 4 horses, breathing hard and wide-eyed, moved in circles in the corral. The barn burned. There was nothing more to do with it. It was too far gone. "You went back in," Ethan said. He was still holding her arm. His grip was not gentle. "Patience wouldn't come," Clara said. "You could have. She's 11 years old, and she trusts people, and she was going to die in there." Clara turned to look at him. "You'd have done the same." He looked at her for a long moment. The fire was reflected in his eyes. His face was streaked with smoke, and he was still gripping her arm like he needed the confirmation of it. "Yes," he said. "I would have." They looked at each other in the firelight with smoke in their hair and their lungs and the remains of the night around them. "This was deliberate," Clara said. "Yes." "He moved faster than I expected." "He's afraid," Ethan said. "Men like Doss move fast when they're afraid. That's the tell. When they're comfortable, they're patient. When they panic—" He looked at the barn. "They make mistakes. This is a mistake." The barn was 3/4 consumed. "Arson is a federal crime," Ethan said, "and he just committed it the week we filed a federal case." He looked at her. "We need to send for the sheriff tonight. Right now, before anything is disturbed." Clara thought about this. About Doss afraid. About the difference between a patient, calculating man and a frightened one. About what frightened men did when the ground shifted under them. "He's going to escalate," she said. Yes, this wasn't the last thing. This was the first thing in a different kind of fight. "Yes," Ethan said. "I think that's right." Clara looked at what was left of the barn. At the 4 horses moving in the corral. At the sky beginning barely to think about dawn somewhere far to the east. "Then we need to be ready," she said. "We are ready," Ethan said. She looked at him. "You walked into a burning barn for a horse," he said quietly. "And you organized 10 families in 2 weeks against a man who has controlled this county for 20 years. And you went to Nathaniel Calloway alone because you understood something about his pride that most people would have missed." He held her gaze with something in his that was open and undefended in a way she was only beginning to know how to read. "You've been ready. You've been ready your whole life. You just didn't have anything worth being ready for." The fire crackled. One of the horses called out, and another answered. Clara did not look away. "We need to send for the sheriff," she said. "I'll ride," he said. "And Hargrove," she said. "He needs to know tonight. I'll send a wire from town. Come back fast." "I will," he said. He started for the corral to saddle a horse, and she watched him go, and she thought about 10 families and a burned barn, and a man who had stopped being patient because something had finally made him afraid. She thought about what it meant that the thing that made him afraid was her, and standing in the gray edge of a Montana dawn, with smoke in her hair and a key in her pocket and 4 horses watching her from the corral. Clara Bennett thought for the first time in her life that she might just be exactly as dangerous as a frightened, powerful man seemed to think she was. That she decided was a very good thing to be. Sheriff Dale Pruitt arrived at Walker Ranch at 6:30 in the morning with the kind of expression that said he had hoped, when the rider came to his door in the dark, that it was something simple. It was not simple. He walked the perimeter of what remained of the barn, which was not much. The structure had gone fast, the summer dry wood giving the fire everything it asked for, and he asked his questions in the flat, methodical way of a man who had learned that keeping his voice neutral was the only way to keep other people calm enough to tell him useful things. Clara answered every question directly. She told him about Doss, about the original debt arrangement, about Hargrove and the federal filing, and the threatening letters she produced, both of them folded precisely from the inside pocket of the coat she had grabbed on her way out of the house, and she told him about the timeline. The filing on Thursday, the barn on Saturday night before the weekend was out. Pruitt listened without interrupting. When she finished, he looked at the letters, looked at the barn, looked at Clara. "You're saying Doss ordered this," he said. "I'm saying a barn doesn't catch fire from the inside on a night with no lightning 2 days after we filed a federal fraud case," Clara said. "Make of that what you will." Pruitt was quiet for a moment. He was not a stupid man, Clara had decided. He was a careful one, in the way that men with complicated political positions learn to be careful. He owed his position partly to council approval, and the council was partly Doss's, and he had been navigating that tension for the better part of a decade without forcing a confrontation either direction. This, she understood, was the moment that stopped being possible. "I'll need to take the letters," he said. "I have copies," she said. "Hargrove has copies." "Of course you do," Pruitt said, and something in his tone was not quite admiration, but was in the same county as respect. He tucked the letters into his coat. "I'll open an investigation into the fire. I won't make promises about where it leads." "I'm not asking for promises," Clara said. "I'm asking for it to be taken seriously." He looked at her steadily. "I'm here at 6:30 in the morning, Miss Bennett. I'd say it's being taken seriously." Ethan, who had returned from town an hour earlier and had been standing a few feet back during most of this conversation, said, "Appreciate you coming out, Dale." Pruitt glanced at him. Something passed between them, the shorthand of men who have known each other a long time and trust each other enough to not need to say the whole thing out loud. "I'll be in touch," Pruitt said. He started for his horse, stopped. "Miss Bennett, you need to understand something." She looked at him. "If what you're telling me is correct, if Doss did this, then his patience has run out. That means the next thing won't be a letter. It won't be called loan notes. It won't be a barn." He held her gaze without apology. "I'm not saying that to scare you. I'm saying it so you're clear on what you're dealing with." "I'm clear," Clara said. He nodded, rode away. Clara watched him go, and then turned to find Ethan watching her. "He's right," Ethan said. "I know he's right." She looked at the remains of the barn, at the gray morning, at the 4 horses in the corral who were calmer now, grazing with the pragmatic unconcern of animals who live entirely in the present. "I'm not frightened of what's coming." "You should be a little frightened," he said. "That's the healthy response." "I'm appropriately frightened," she said. "I'm also not stopping." He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "I just—" He stopped. Something moved across his face that she didn't have a complete vocabulary for yet, but she was learning. "I need you to be careful, Clara. Not because I don't think you can handle it, because I—" Another stop. "Because," she said quietly, Ed. He looked at her directly. "Because I have spent 7 years noticing you from a distance," he said, "and I would very much like not to spend the rest of my life doing the same thing." The morning air was still cool at this hour. The birds were beginning. "That's the most words you've said at one time since I've known you," Clara said. "I've been saving them," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "Ethan, when this is over." "When this is over," he said, and he said it like a promise. She nodded. "When this is over," she said again. And that was enough. For now, that was enough. Hargrove arrived Monday afternoon with news that changed the shape of everything. He came off his horse faster than his usual careful manner suggested was his habit, and Clara, who had been in the yard working with the horses, read his pace before she could read his face. "What happened?" she said. "Come inside," he said. "Both of you." They sat at the kitchen table, which had become in the past 2 weeks the functional center of something that had started as one-woman situation and become considerably larger. Hargrove spread papers that Clara could see were different from his usual documentation, New letterhead, a federal stamp she hadn't seen before. "The circuit court moved faster than I anticipated," Hargrove said. "I submitted a motion for emergency injunctive relief Friday night, citing the threatening communications and the arson. I ask that all law enforcement actions by Doss's operation be suspended pending the full hearing." "And," Ethan said, "the motion was granted this morning." Hargrove set a document on the table. "As of 8 o'clock today, Harlan Doss cannot call, collect, or enforce any outstanding loan notes against the 10 named families until the federal hearing concludes." Clara stared at the paper. "He can't touch them," she said. "Not legally, not until after the hearing." "When is the hearing?" 8 weeks. Hargrove looked at her over his papers. "Which gives us 8 weeks to build the strongest possible case." 8 weeks was not a long time. It was also, Clara thought, more than she had expected to have. "What does Doss do now?" she said. Hargrove was quiet for a moment. "He has 3 options. He can cooperate with the hearing process, which is not in his character. He can attempt to find procedural grounds to challenge the injunction, which his attorneys will certainly try. Or," he paused, "he can attempt to make the case against him disappear before it reaches the court." "Meaning the witnesses," Clara said. "Meaning the witnesses," Hargrove confirmed. "Specifically the ones whose testimony is most central to establishing the pattern." Clara and Ethan looked at each other. "Which families?" Ethan said. "The Harmons, the Calloways. And you, Miss Bennett." He met her eyes without softening it. "Your testimony about the original arrangement, the debt for person exchange, is the clearest single example of how Doss's operation crosses from aggressive lending into something the federal court will recognize as trafficking in human dependency. It's the most human piece of the case. Juries, even federal ones, respond to a human piece." Clara absorbed that. "He'll come for me first," she said. "I think it's possible, yes." "Then we move her," Ethan said immediately. "I'm not moving," Clara said. "Clara, I'm not moving." She kept her voice level. "Running is what Doss expects. It's what everyone who's ever been in this position has done, and it's part of why he's been able to operate for 20 years, because the people he targets are always too isolated and too frightened to stand their ground." She looked at Ethan. "I am not going to be the reason this case falls apart. Not after 10 families signed on to it. Not after Eleanor Harmon sat across from me and told me what Doss did to her water rights. Not after Nathaniel Calloway let me into his house." She shook her head. "No." The kitchen was very quiet. "All right," Ethan said, not agreeing that it was the right choice. She could hear that clearly, but accepting her right to make it. "What can we do to make it safer to stay?" Hargrove asked. "I want to write to the federal marshal's office," Clara said. "Directly, citing the arson as federal interference with witnesses in an active federal case." Hargrove blinked. Then he made a note. "That is in fact exactly the correct legal argument. I should have suggested it myself." "You would have gotten there," Clara said. "I just got there first." So, the letter to the federal marshal's office went out Tuesday morning. The response came Thursday faster than any of them expected, a terse official communication informing them that a deputy federal marshal would be dispatched to Ridgeline County within the week to investigate the reported arson and assess witness safety. Doss knew by Thursday afternoon. Clara heard about his reaction from Margaret Holt, who seemed to have developed a network of information that would have impressed a military intelligence operation, and who appeared at the ranch Thursday evening with a basket of food she described as practical and a piece of news she described as interesting. "He called an emergency meeting of the county council," Margaret said, sitting across from Clara at the kitchen table with Ethan in the doorway. "All 5 members, tonight. My nephew works evening cleanup at the council hall, and he heard some of it before they closed the doors." "What did he hear?" Clara said. "Doss told them the federal investigation was a threat to the entire county's financial stability. That if his lending operation was disrupted, it would affect credit availability for every family in the region. He was trying to get council members to sign a letter to the circuit court arguing against the injunction." "Did they sign?" Margaret's expression shifted. 3 of them did. The 2 he appointed refused." Clara sat with that for a moment. The two DOS appointees, the men who owed their positions directly to him, had refused to sign a letter supporting him. "They're reading the wind," Ethan said from the doorway. "They're reading the federal marshal's office letterhead," Margaret said dryly. "Same thing at this stage." "Who are the three who signed?" Clara asked. Margaret told her. Clara filed the names carefully. "Those three," she said to Hargrove, who had been working at the far end of the table during this conversation. "Are they in your council voting documentation?" Hargrove looked up. "Two of them appear in the Water Rights Subcommittee vote. The third is on the Supply Review Committee that canceled Wicker's mill contract." "So they signed a letter in active support of a man whose fraudulent council activities they participated in," Clara said. After the federal case was filed, Hargrove set down his pen, picked up a fresh piece of paper. "That is a characterization," he said carefully, "that I believe a federal judge will find very illuminating." Friday brought the deputy federal marshal. His name was Samuel Cross, a compact, weathered man in his 40s, who wore his authority the way experienced men wore well-broken boots comfortably and without needing to draw attention to it. He arrived at the ranch before noon, examined the barn site with thorough attention, and sat with Clara and Hargrove for 3 hours reviewing documentation. He had a particular quality Cross did of asking questions that sounded simple and were not. "Miss Bennett," he said at one point, looking at her over the top of his notes, "in your estimation, and I want your estimation, not the lawyer's, what is Doss most afraid of losing? The money, the land, the council position?" Clara thought about it carefully. "None of those," she said. "He's afraid of losing the story." Cross tilted his head slightly. "He's spent 20 years building a specific story about himself in this county," Clara said. "Successful businessman, civic contributor, the man who keeps credit available in a region where banking is scarce. That story is what protects everything else. The money and the land and the council, those are downstream of the story. If the story goes, everything goes." She paused. "That's why the federal case is more threatening than a county lawsuit would be. A county case is local news. A federal hearing is a different kind of exposure." Cross studied her for a moment. "And you understand," he said, that makes you and your families very specific targets for a man who has a great deal to lose." "Yes," she said. "I do." "And you're proceeding anyway." "Yes," she said. "I am." Cross made a note. "All right," he said. "Here is what I can do. I will be here through the weekend and make my report Monday. Based on what I've seen and what you've described, I'm comfortable characterizing the arson as federal witness intimidation, which means it falls under my office's jurisdiction, rather than the county sheriff's. That changes Sheriff Pruitt's position considerably. He no longer has to navigate the local political weight of this case because it's no longer primarily a local case." "That's significant," Hargrove said. "Pruitt's a decent man in a difficult position," Cross said. He looked at Clara. "You gave him the letters immediately the morning after the fire without being asked. That was the right call. It put him on the right side of the documentation from the start." Clara nodded. "One more thing," Cross said. He looked between her and Ethan. "Is there somewhere other than this ranch where Miss Bennett can receive correspondence and meet with families over the next 8 weeks? Somewhere that Doss's people don't already know about and watch?" Clara and Ethan looked at each other. "Margaret Holt's store," Clara said immediately. Margaret, who had stayed on through the meeting with the unflappable presence of a woman who has decided she is part of this, whether anyone has formally invited her or not, said, "I was wondering when someone was going to think of that." Cross almost smiled. "The dry goods store," he said. "That'll do." The twist came on Sunday. It came from the direction Clara had not been watching, which was of course the direction twists always came from. She was at Margaret's store that morning. They had already begun using it as Hargrove had suggested. And Margaret had cleared a back room with the efficiency of someone who had been waiting for a purpose and had just found one when Roy Harmon came in with his hat in his hands and an expression that Clara recognized with a cold settling of her stomach. Something had happened. "What is it?" she said. It's Roy Calloway, Harmon said. Not Nathaniel Calloway. Roy Calloway. Nathaniel's son, 24 years old, who worked at the Doss grain operation as a day laborer because there was no other steady work in the county and a young man needed income. What about him? Clara said. Doss let him go yesterday, Harmon said. No notice? No reason given. He paused. And this morning Nathaniel came to find me. He says Roy Calloway needs his family's testimony withdrawn from the case. The back room went very quiet. Because of the job, Clara said. Roy's the only steady income they have right now, Harmon said. The farm doesn't bring in cash money, without Roy's wages. I understand, Clara said. Nathaniel says he's sorry. He says he knows what it means for the case, but he can't. I understand, Clara said again. She was proud of how steady her voice was. Roy, give me an hour. Harmon looked at her with something that was part hope and part the look of someone who doesn't want to feel hope because it's already disappointed them too many times. What are you going to do? I'm going to talk to James Hargrove, she said, and then I'm going to talk to Nathaniel Calloway. Hargrove was not easy about it. If we lose the Calloway testimony, we lose the most direct documentation of the subcommittee water rights abuse, he said. It weakens the systemic argument significantly. I know, Clara said. There's no legal mechanism to protect Roy Calloway's employment. Private labor is at will in this territory. I know that too. Clara looked at Hargrove steadily. But is there any legal argument that his termination the week after his family signed federal witness documentation constitutes retaliatory interference with witnesses? Hargrove went still. Because if it does, Clara said, then Doss just handed us another federal charge, and Roy Calloway's termination becomes part of the case, rather than the end of it. Hargrove picked up his pen slowly. The statute on witness interference does encompass economic retaliation against witnesses and their immediate family members in federal cases, he said, in the particular tone of a man who is both impressed and slightly chagrined that he hadn't gotten there first. If we can document the timing, the signing the termination, the lack of any other stated cause. Can we? Clara said. The signing date is on federal documentation. The termination date is yesterday. Yes, we can document the timing. He was already writing. I'll need Nathaniel Calloway in this room today. I'll bring him, Clara said. She was out the door before the sentence was finished. Nathaniel Calloway did not want to come. She found him at his farm sitting on his porch with the posture of a man who has made a painful decision and is now defending it against everyone, including himself. Miss Bennett, he said when he saw her coming up the path. I told Roy Harmon, I'm sorry about the case, but my son, your son's termination is a federal crime, Clara said. She said it without preamble, because she had decided on the ride over that Nathaniel Calloway was a man who needed information, not persuasion. If Doss fired Roy because of your family's testimony in a federal case, that's witness retaliation under federal statute. It's an additional charge against Doss, and it's something the marshal's office can act on directly. Nathaniel stared at her. Your son may be able to get his wages recovered, she said, potentially with damages, but Hargrove needs to see you today, and he needs documentation of when Roy signed on and when he was let go. That's... Nathaniel stopped. That's actually a crime, firing someone because their father... In a federal witness case, yes, Clara said. Doss knows the law well enough to use it against people. He may not have thought through how well other people know it. Nathaniel looked at his hands. He thought he was taking something from us, Nathaniel said slowly. He thought he was, Clara said. He wasn't. Nathaniel Calloway stood up from his chair. He was 68 years old, and it took him a moment, and when he was standing, he put on his hat with the deliberate precision of a man putting on his dignity. Let's go see your attorney, he said. And the week that followed moved fast enough that Clara lost track of individual days and began thinking in terms of developments instead. Cross filed his federal arson report. Hargrove added the Calloway termination to the case documentation. Deputy Marshal Cross, on his way back to Billings, paid a formal visit to Harlan Doss's office. A visit that lasted 40 minutes, and which Doss's secretary later described to Margaret's nephew as the quietest and most frightening conversation she had ever been near without being in. Doss said nothing publicly. That silence was its own kind of information. The 3 council members who had signed the support letter began making themselves scarce. 2 of them, Clara heard through Margaret, had consulted private attorneys. Margaret Holt had emerged by this point as something that the original plan had not accounted for, but which turned out to be one of its most important elements, a center of gravity for information in the town itself. People came to her store. People talked in her store. People were honest in her store, in a way they weren't in more formal settings, because it was a store and buying flour and talking while you did it felt different from making a statement. She passed everything useful to Clara without being asked. "You knew she'd be valuable," Ethan said one evening. "I knew she was already in the middle of it," Clara said. "She'd already chosen her side the day she came out of her store and told me she wasn't part of what Doss did. I just gave her something to do with the choice she'd already made." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "You do that," he said. "Find people who have already decided and give them a place to stand." She looked at him. "Harmon was already angry," he said. "Calloway had already been humiliated past what he could endure. The Fenners were already grieving. You didn't persuade them, you just showed them that someone else was standing up first." Clara thought about that, about the specific thing it was and was not. "Someone had to be first," she said. "It might as well be someone who didn't have much left to lose." "You had everything to lose," Ethan said. "You just weren't willing to let the losing happen quietly." She looked at him in the lamplight. "Ethan," she said. "Yes. The thing you said, before Cross arrived. When this is over." He went very still. "I'm not a patient woman by nature," she said. "I've been patient here because there was work to do and I needed my attention on the work. But I want you to know that I've been thinking about it. About what it means, about—" She stopped, found her way through. "About what it would mean to stay. Not as an employee, not as someone you rescued, as a choice I make because this place has become—" She looked at her hands. "Because you have become something I didn't expect and can't quite imagine being without." The kitchen was completely quiet. "Clara," Ethan said, and her name in his voice had a quality she had never heard in anyone's voice before, like it was the word he'd been waiting to say in the right way for a very long time. "Don't say anything yet," she said. "When this is over, say it then." "Why?" "Because I want to hear it when it's not tangled up with barn fires and federal cases and everything else. I want to hear it when it's just us and the mountains and a morning that belongs to us." He looked at her for a long time. "All right," he said. "When this is over." "When this is over," she said, and she meant every word. The hearing date was set for the 3rd week of September. 2 weeks out, Doss's attorneys filed a motion to delay on procedural grounds. Hargrove had anticipated it and had a counter-motion prepared and filed within 24 hours. The circuit judge denied the delay. 1 week out, one of the 3 council members who had signed the support letter contacted Hargrove directly. His name was Thomas Briggs, and he was 55 years old and had been on the county council for 11 years, the last 6 of those navigating a relationship with Doss that had started as a political alliance and somewhere along the way had become something that made him unable to sleep. He wanted to talk about the subcommittee votes. In exchange for cooperation, he wanted reduced exposure. Hargrove brought Clara into the room for that conversation, and Clara sat and listened while Briggs explained in the careful and self-serving but ultimately truthful account of a man who has decided confession is safer than continued silence, exactly how the council mechanism had worked. Who had communicated what to whom? What they had been told the votes were for, and what they had suspected the votes were actually for. What Doss had provided in return. When Briggs finished, Clara said, "The Harmon family lost their water rights through one of those votes." Briggs looked at the table. "The Wickers lost a 15-year contract," she said. through one of those votes. I know, Briggs said. I want you to say that to the federal judge, she said. Not to us, to the judge. That's what the cooperation agreement. I don't want the legal version, Clara said. I want you to look at a federal judge and say what you just said to me. That you knew, that you participated, that you understood what you were voting to take from people. She held his gaze steadily. The law will decide what your cooperation is worth. But the families who lost things because of those votes deserve to hear an actual human being say, I knew and I did it anyway. Briggs was quiet for a long time. Yes, he said finally. All right, yes. Hargrove, after Briggs had left, said to Clara, that was not legally necessary. No, Clara said. It was necessary for something else. Yes, she said. It was. The morning before the hearing, Clara rode to her father's farm. She had been there twice in the past 8 weeks, both times with specific purpose. This time, she had no specific purpose. She just needed to go. Roy Bennett was older looking than she remembered, not dramatically. 8 weeks was not a lifetime, but something had settled into him that hadn't been there before. A gravity, a consequence he was living inside. He met her in the yard. You came, he said. I came, she said. They stood in the yard and looked at each other, and Clara thought about what to say and found that most of what she'd spent the summer wanting to say had already been said or had become unnecessary to say because they both already knew it. What happens tomorrow? Roy said. At the hearing. Hargrove presents the case. The families testify. Briggs testifies. The federal judge decides whether to proceed to a full trial. She paused. It's likely he does. The documentation is strong. And Doss? He'll face charges, federal ones, what he actually serves. She shook her head. That depends on a lot of things I can't control. Your mother would have been proud of you, Roy said. He said it quietly, looking at the ground. I know that doesn't fix anything. No, Clara said, it doesn't. I know He stopped. I know what I did, what I agreed to. I've been sitting with that every day. Good, she said, not unkindly, just honestly. Keep sitting with it. He looked up. I love you, Pa, she said. That hasn't changed. But I'm not going to tell you it's all right. It's not all right. What you agreed to put me through is not something I can call all right just to make us both feel better. He nodded. What I can tell you, she said, is that I'm choosing to move forward, with my own life, on my own terms. And I'm not going to let what you did be the thing that defines where I end up. She looked at him steadily. That's the best I can do right now. It's more than I deserve, Roy said. Yes, she said. It is. She rode back up the mountain in the afternoon light, with 8 weeks of a summer she had not expected behind her and one morning ahead of her that would change the shape of what came next. She thought about 10 families, about Eleanor Harmon's eyes in that first meeting, about Nathaniel Calloway putting on his hat like putting on his dignity. About Margaret Holt clearing a back room in her store and never once asking what was in it for her. She thought about a man who had been watching her for 7 years and had shown up on the right morning with counted-out money and a key and the particular decency of not asking her to be grateful. She thought about when this is over. She rode through the ranch gate as the sun started dropping, and Ethan was at the corral fence, and he looked up when he heard her horse, and the look on his face when he saw her was the same look. It had been for 8 weeks, steady, certain there in a way that had become the most reliable thing in her landscape, and Clara Bennett, who had been sold and saved and built something extraordinary in a summer that had tried to break her thought that tomorrow the hearing would begin. And after that, the rest of it. The federal hearing began on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of September in a courtroom in Billings that smelled like old wood and paper, and the particular weight of decisions that had been made in it over many years. Clara arrived with Hargrove and Ethan, and found the 10 families already there, filling the gallery benches with the specific quality of people who have come somewhere important and know it. Eleanor Harmon sat with her husband in the second row. Tom Wicker was in the third, his white mustache set in the expression of a man who had decided something and was not going to undecide it. The Fenners, the Dailies, the Morrisons, all of them, every family that had signed, present and accounted for on a Tuesday morning in September, because a woman they had known for 8 weeks had knocked on their doors and told them the truth and not asked them to be anything other than what they were. Nathaniel Calloway was in the front row. He caught Clara's eye when she came in and gave her a nod that was small and exact and carried inside it everything neither of them needed to say out loud. Harlan Doss sat at the respondents' table with 2 attorneys and the expression of a man who has spent 20 years in a room where he controlled all the furniture and is now sitting in one where he does not. Clara sat behind Hargrove's table, and she did not look at Doss again. The federal judge was a woman named Harriet Voss, 60 years old, with silver hair pulled back and reading glasses she wore on a chain, and the manner of someone who had heard a great many people try to explain why the rules did not apply to them and had found these explanations across the board unconvincing. She called the hearing to order at 9 o'clock precisely. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, "you may begin." Hargrove stood. Clara had heard him practice his opening. She knew the structure of it, the careful layering of documentation and testimony he had assembled over 8 weeks. She had helped him think through the order of witnesses. She had read every piece of paper in the file. But hearing it in the actual room with all 10 families behind her and a federal judge in front of her, and Doss's attorneys making notes at the table across the aisle, was different from knowing it in the abstract. It was real. It had always been real. But it became real in a different way when the words went into the air of a federal courtroom and could not be taken back. Hargrove laid out the pattern in 40 minutes methodically and without drama, because the pattern itself was dramatic enough, and he was too good a lawyer to gild it. 20 years of lending. 20 years of subcommittee votes. 20 years of loans structured to be difficult to repay, and then accelerated at precisely the moments most damaging to the families carrying them. The water rights, the mill contracts, the equipment credits, the debt for person arrangement that had been made with Roy Bennett in July, and which Hargrove described in language that was legally precise and completely unflinchingly clear about what it had been. Doss's lead attorney objected 4 times during the opening. Judge Voss sustained none of them. When Hargrove sat down, she looked at the respondents' table. "Mr. Alcott, your opening." Doss's attorney stood. He was smooth expensive and had clearly decided that the best available defense was to characterize everything as a series of legitimate business decisions that had been selectively assembled by a motivated opponent into a false narrative. He was good at his job. Clara could see that. He spoke for 35 minutes and he made several arguments that were not without technical merit. But when he sat down, Clara watched Judge Voss make a note in her file, and the quality of that note, the deliberateness of it, the slight settling of the judge's expression, told her something she filed away carefully. Judge Voss had read the file before today. She had read all of it. The first witness was Eleanor Harmon. Eleanor sat in the witness chair with her hands folded in her lap and answered Hargrove's questions in the flat, factual voice of a woman who has rehearsed the emotional version and set it aside because she understands that facts are more damaging than grief. She described the first loan, the terms, the moment she understood the water rights were gone, the subcommittee vote she had learned about through a neighbor 3 weeks after it had already happened. "Mrs. Harmon," Hargrove said, "in your experience, was this sequence of events communicated to you in advance? Were you informed that the County Infrastructure Committee would be reviewing your water access?" "No," Eleanor said. "We found out from a posting on the county notice board, after the vote was already done. And when you inquired about the vote, what were you told?" "We were told it was standard county infrastructure management, that the water routing had been reassigned for efficiency purposes." Eleanor paused. "We were told it was nothing to do with our loan. Those were the words. Nothing to do with our loan." And was it, in your opinion, nothing to do with your loan? Eleanor looked at Judge Voss rather than at Hargrove when she answered. A direct, honest, unflinching look. The loan was called 6 weeks after the water rights were reassigned, she said. Without the water, the remaining land couldn't sustain a crop. Without a crop, we couldn't service the loan. The loan was called when we fell behind on service. We fell behind because the water was gone, and the water was gone because a committee voted it away without telling us. She paused. You tell me if that's nothing to do with the loan. Doss's attorney objected. Opinion testimony, he said. Judge Voss looked at him for a moment. Overruled, she said. The witness may continue. Why? Tom Wicker testified next, then James Fenner, then 2 of the other families, each of them adding a piece of the pattern, each piece fitting against the others in a way that Hargrove had designed, deliberately building the picture, not through any single dramatic moment, but through the accumulated weight of consistency. The same mechanism, the same sequence, the same results. Different families, different years, same system underneath. Doss's attorneys cross-examined each witness. They were professional about it. They asked about loan terms and payment histories and whether witnesses had fully understood what they were signing. They were looking for the crack in each account, the moment of individual misunderstanding that could be used to reframe the whole. They did not find it. Clara watched the jury, 6 people in this particular federal hearing format, brought in from outside the county by Judge Voss's explicit instruction, watching the witnesses. She watched their faces the way she had learned to watch faces over the past 8 weeks. The Fenner testimony made the woman in the second juror's chair set her jaw. Tom Wicker's account of the mill contract made the man on the far left make a note. They were listening. People in actual trouble told the truth in a specific way that was different from any other kind of truth-telling, and the jury could hear it. Thomas Briggs took the stand on Wednesday morning. He had a different quality from the family witnesses, not because he was less honest, but because his honesty cost him more. The families had told the truth about what had been done to them. Briggs was telling the truth about what he had done. He sat in the chair and answered Hargrove's questions in the measured cadence of a man who has made his peace with a decision and is now living through the consequences of that peace. He described the subcommittee structure, the way members were appointed, the communications he had received from Doss before votes. Communications that did not technically instruct him how to vote, but which described the outcomes Doss considered preferable and the ways in which his continued cooperation would be recognized. Mr. Briggs, Hargrove said, at any point during your tenure on these committees, did you believe the votes you were casting represented the interest of the county residents affected by those votes? A long pause. No, Briggs said. I did not. Did you cast them anyway? Yes. Why? Another pause. Longer. Because it was easier, Briggs said, because Doss had reach and I had a position, and it was easier to keep the position than to ask hard questions about how I kept it. He looked at the gallery for the first time, and Clara saw his eyes move across the family witnesses without stopping, because he could not stop, because stopping would mean actually seeing them. I told myself it was business, that it was county management, that I didn't have direct knowledge of what the outcomes would be for individual families. He stopped. That was a lie I told myself for 11 years. I knew what the outcomes would be. The courtroom was very quiet. No further questions, Hargrove said. Doss's attorney stood for cross-examination and went at Briggs hard, the cooperation agreement, the reduced exposure, the self-interest in his testimony. He was trying to paint Briggs as a man saying what he needed to say to save himself. Briggs looked at the attorney and said, I am trying to save myself. That's true. But everything I've said is also true. Both of those things can be true at the same time. The attorney sat down. Judge Voss looked at the clock. We'll recess for lunch, she said. Miss Bennett, you're on the stand at 1 o'clock. Clara had known this was coming. She had known it for 8 weeks, had thought about it in the early mornings when she woke before the sun had rehearsed it with Hargrove twice, and then told him she didn't want to rehearse it again because rehearsing it made her feel like she was preparing a performance, and what she needed to give the court was not a performance. She sat in the witness chair at 1 o'clock and looked at the room. The 10 families in the gallery. Ethan in the back row, where he had been all morning, steady and present, in the way he was always present. Judge Voss, with her reading glasses on the chain. The jury. Hargrove at the table, and Doss at the respondent's table for the first time all morning, looking directly at her. She looked back at him for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to let him understand that she was not afraid of being looked at. Then she turned to Hargrove. "Miss Bennett," Hargrove said. "In July of this year, what were the circumstances under which you came to leave your father's property?" Clara told it. She told it the way she had decided to tell it, not with performance and not with emotion, managed so tightly that the truth got squeezed out of it, but the way she would tell it to someone she trusted. Plainly. In order. The wall between the rooms. Her father's voice saying her name like a transaction. The morning. Doss at the door. The choice she had not been asked if she wanted to make. She told it, and the courtroom stayed very quiet through all of it, and she did not look at Doss while she was talking, and she did not look at Ethan either, because she needed to be the only person in this account. Not rescued, not avenged, just witnessed. When she got to the morning Ethan had come, she referred to him as Mr. Walker, because this was a legal proceeding, and she was the one choosing her language. She described it accurately. What he had done, the debt paid, the offer of work, the key. "Miss Bennett," Hargrove said, "you mentioned a key. Can you describe that?" "It was a key to the front door of the ranch and to my room," she said. "Mr. Walker said I could keep it, even if I decided to leave, so I would know there was no version of the arrangement where I was locked in." The jurywoman who had set her jaw during the Fenner testimony looked down at her hands briefly. "And what did that mean to you?" Hargrove asked. Clara thought about the weight of the key the first morning, about what it meant to be given the means of your own departure by the person who had brought you there. "It meant I had a choice," she said. "For the first time in that whole situation, I had a choice. And the person who gave it to me was not the one who was supposed to be offering choices. The person who was supposed to protect my ability to choose was my father, and he hadn't." A silence. "No further questions," Hargrove said. Doss's attorney stood. He approached the witness stand with the careful energy of a man who has looked at his options and chosen the least damaging one. "Miss Bennett," he said, "Mr. Doss's arrangement with your father was a private financial agreement between 2 adults. Is it your testimony that Mr. Doss held a weapon to your father's head?" "No," Clara said. "Is it your testimony that your father was physically coerced?" "No," she said. "He was financially coerced, which is a different kind of weapon." A slight ripple in the gallery. The attorney pressed on. "You've presented Mr. Walker's intervention as a rescue, but the arrangement he offered you living in his home working for wages, wasn't that also a form of dependency?" "It was employment," Clara said. "The difference between what Doss arranged and what Mr. Walker offered is the same as the difference between a cage and a door. One of them locks from the outside. The other one you can walk through whenever you choose." The attorney opened his mouth. Judge Voss said, "Move on, Mr. Alcott." He moved on. He tried 3 more angles. Clara answered each one without wavering, without anger, without anything that could be characterized as hysteria or self-pity or motivated embellishment. She answered like a woman who has nothing to hide because she has hidden nothing, and that quality, the specific quality of truth that has nothing to protect, was the hardest thing in the world to argue against. When he sat down, she looked at Judge Voss. "You may step down, Miss Bennett," Judge Voss said. And then, which she had not done for any other witness, "Thank you." Closing arguments were Thursday morning. Hargrove was 38 minutes and precise as a survey map. Doss's attorney was 45 minutes and tried very hard. Judge Voss looked at the jury after both were done and said, "You'll begin deliberations this afternoon." The jury came back in 4 hours. 4 hours was not long. Clara knew that. Hargrove had told her that the speed of a verdict was not always an indication of its direction, but that in his experience, 4 hours in a federal fraud case of this complexity meant the jury had not spent much time disagreeing. She sat in the gallery with Ethan beside her when the foreperson stood. His shoulder was against hers. She had reached for his hand at some point in the previous 4 hours, without noticing she was doing it, and he had taken it without comment, and neither of them had let go. The foreperson read the verdict. On the charge of systematic financial fraud against county residents through manipulated lending practices, guilty. On the charge of corruption of public office through the appointment and direction of county council subcommittee members, guilty. On the charge of federal witness intimidation through written threatening communications, guilty. On the charge of federal witness intimidation through arson of property belonging to a witness in an active federal case, guilty. On the charge of federal witness intimidation through retaliatory economic action against a witness's immediate family member, guilty. Each guilty landed in the courtroom like something physical. Clara felt Ethan's hand tighten around hers with each one. When the foreperson sat down, the room held its breath for a moment. Then, Eleanor Harmon in the second row made a sound that was not quite a word. Just a sound low and released the particular noise of a weight that has been carried for years, finally setting down. And something broke open in the room carefully and completely, and the 10 families who had come to Billings on a Tuesday morning were not 10 separate frightened people anymore, but 10 families who had done something together that none of them could have done alone. And the difference between those two things was everything. Judge Voss called the room to order. She looked at Harlan Doss, who was sitting at his table, with the expression of a man who has just understood that the story he had spent 20 years building has ended. "Sentencing will be scheduled in 30 days, she said. "Mr. Doss, you are remanded to custody pending that hearing." She looked at her papers. "All loan instruments under the purview of this case are hereby formally suspended pending restitution determinations to be made in consultation with the affected parties and their legal representatives." She looked up. "Court is adjourned." The gavel came down. Clara sat in the gallery and did not move for a moment. She heard the room around her voice's movement, someone crying quietly. Hargrove talking to someone in the quick, efficient tone of a man who has won and is already thinking about the next step. But she sat inside the moment and let it be what it was. Ethan's hand was still in hers. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the same look he had given her across the kitchen table on the night they wrote to Hargrove, and from the porch in the firelight, the night the barn burned, and from the ranch gate every time she rode out and came back. "It's over," he said. "Yes," she said. "Then I have something to say." She turned to face him fully right there in the gallery of a federal courtroom in Billings, with 10 families around them, and the sound of a just verdict still in the air. "Say it," she said. He looked at her with the direct, uncomplicated honesty of a man who had decided he was done saving things for later. "I have loved you since October of 1880, he said, in a street in Ridgeline in a brown coat with brass buttons. "Before I knew your name well enough to say it without practicing. Before I had any reason to think I'd ever be in a position to tell you." He paused. "I'm telling you now. Not because of what just happened, and not because of what you built this summer, and not because of the 10 families, or the case, or any of it. I'm telling you because I'm done being the man who watches from a distance when I could be standing right next to you." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Outside the courtroom windows, September in Montana was doing what September did, turning the air to something cleaner and colder and more honest than summer, the way autumn always arrived with a clarity that summer couldn't quite manage. "I'm not easy to live with," she said. "I've been told that." "I'm not easy either," he said. "I don't talk enough and I work too early, and I've never been good at saying difficult things until it's almost too late." "It took you 7 years," she said. "I'm aware," he said. "I'm working on the timeline." Something loosened in her chest, some last tightly held thing that had been waiting for the right moment to let go. "Ethan Walker," she said, "I walked into a burning barn for one of your horses." "I know," he said. I organized 10 families and filed a federal case and stood in front of a judge and told the truth about the worst morning of my life, she said. I did all of that. I know, he said. I was watching. If I say yes, she said, if I stay, it's not because you saved me. It's not because I owe you. It's not because I don't have anywhere else to go. I know that, he said quietly. I have never wanted it to be any of those things. It's because I choose to, she said. Because this you is what I'm choosing. He looked at her with 7 years in his face, and a summer in his eyes, and the particular expression of a man who has been patient long enough to deserve what patience finally brought him. Then stay, he said. Stay because you want to. Stay because you choose it. Stay because the mountains are better with you in them, and the kitchen is better with you in it. And every morning I've woken up on that ranch this summer has been better than any morning before you came. Clara Bennett, who had been sold and rescued and rebuilt, and stood up in a federal courtroom and told the truth, felt the last wall inside her, the one she had built in a night while listening through a wall to men decide her value, finally completely come down. Yes, she said, one word, the one that mattered. He brought her hand up and held it in both of his and looked at her like she was the most important thing he had ever been allowed to see clearly. When we get home, he said, I'm going to rebuild the barn. We're going to rebuild the barn, she said. He almost smiled. We, he said, like it was the best word he'd heard in a long time. We, she confirmed. 1. They were married in November, on a Saturday morning, in a ceremony at Walker Ranch that was small by the standards of some people and enormous by the standards of two people who had spent most of their lives being alone. Margaret Holt came. Eleanor Harmon brought a pie that was frankly excessive in the best possible way. The Callaways came, Nathaniel and his wife, and Roy, who had a new position at a ranch 2 counties over that had nothing to do with Doss, arranged by Tom Wicker, who had decided on reflection that being a useful member of the community suited him better than being an isolated one. James Fenner came. The Dailies, the Morrisons. James Hargrove came looking slightly less lawyerly than usual in a good coat and an expression of professional satisfaction that was quietly becoming personal warmth. Sheriff Dale Pruitt came, which surprised no one more than Pruitt himself. Roy Bennett came. He stood near the back, and he did not try to be anything other than what he was, a man who had made a serious mistake and was attending his daughter's wedding because she had invited him, and she had invited him because she had decided that forgiveness was something she could choose the same way she chose everything else. Not because it was owed, not because it erased what had happened, but because she was not willing to carry the weight of withholding it for the rest of her life, and carrying it or setting it down was in the end her choice. Roy Bennett cried during the ceremony. Clara saw him from where she stood with Ethan, and she noted it, and returned her attention to the only person in the room who had her full attention. Ethan had worn his good jacket. He'd had his hair cut, which she had not expected, and which she found unreasonably endearing. He stood across from her in the morning light and looked at her with the look she had been learning to read for 4 months. The open, steady. This is the most important thing I have ever been looking at. Look, and said the words the Reverend asked him to say, and meant every syllable of them in a way that was visible to everyone in the room. Clara said her own words. She chose them carefully, because she chose everything carefully, and because the words you say when you mean them permanently are worth the care. When the Reverend said the words that completed the ceremony, Ethan took her face in his hands and kissed her the way he did everything without performance, without the audience in mind, just the simple and completely intentional act of a man who has made a decision and is making it fully. The room made the particular warm noise that rooms make when something real has happened in them. The restitution hearings ran through the winter. The Harmon family's water rights were restored by December. The Wicker Mill contract was reinstated with damages in January. The Fenner loan and the Daly and Morrison notes were formally voided with repayment of amounts already collected. Harlan Doss was sentenced in February to 7 years in federal prison, the first such sentence for systematic financial fraud against agricultural families in the territory's history. Hargrove, who had been quietly building the framework of that precedent all along, told Clara afterward that the sentence would be referenced in similar cases for decades. "You built something bigger than you knew," he said. "We all did," she said. Two of the three council members who had signed the support letter resigned their positions before the sentencing. The third Briggs served a reduced term under his cooperation agreement and was required to make a public statement to the county that he had hoped would feel like a formality, and which turned out in the actual saying of it in front of the people affected to feel like something else. Eleanor Harmon accepted that statement on behalf of the families. She did not make it easy for him. She made it true, which was harder and more important. Roy Bennett sold the farm in March to James Fenner's eldest son, who was looking to expand and who paid a fair price, and was in no way connected to Doss. Roy used the money to clear his remaining debts and put a small amount aside and moved into a room in town that was modest and clean and entirely sufficient. He visited his daughter and son-in-law in the spring. He stayed for a weekend. He was useful with the horses, which he had always been, and he was quiet about the things he could not fix, which was perhaps the most honest thing he had managed in a long time. He came back the following spring and the spring after that. People changed slowly, Clara had concluded. That was all right. Slow was still change. The barn at Walker Ranch was rebuilt that first winter, a project that took 3 months and involved at various points Tom Wicker and Roy Harmon and James Fenner's eldest son and 2 men from the Calloway family, who showed up one Saturday morning with tools and the particular attitude of people who have decided that showing up is the language they speak best. It was bigger than the original barn, better built. It had a new roof and a new east door, and room for 6 horses instead of 4. Clara stood in it the morning it was finished and breathed the smell of new wood and clean hay and felt the winter mountain air coming through the gap where the door had been left open, and thought about a woman in a brown coat and a dog in a street and a man who had never forgotten. She thought about the key she still carried always in her pocket. She didn't need to anymore. There was no lock she was worried about. But she kept it because it reminded her of what it felt like the first morning she had it, the weight of a choice in the palm of her hand, simple and solid and entirely hers. Ethan came to stand beside her in the doorway of the new barn. "Good," he said, looking at it. "Very good," she said. He put his arm around her, and she leaned into him, and they stood together in the doorway of the thing they had built and looked at the mountains that had seen all of it, the fire and the summer and the courtroom and the November morning, and every ordinary and extraordinary day since, and did not need to say anything more. Outside the ranch, spread around them in the winter light, solid and real and entirely theirs. Not because it had been given to her, not because she had been rescued into it, but because she had stood her ground and told the truth and chosen it every day with the full weight of a woman who finally understood that her worth had never been up for someone else to determine. That was the story of Walker Ranch. That was the story of Clara Bennett, who became Clara Walker on a Saturday in November, and never once lost the person she had always been underneath the name. Some stories end with rescue. This one ended with something better. It ended with a woman who saved herself and chose freely, fully, without debt or obligation or fear, to share what she had built with the man who had always known she was worth seeing. And that was the kind of ending that lasted.